this past week, and he's going to have the baptistry ready today. So pray that Roger and I can get down there and there's enough water in it and we can take care of that. It's funny because he kind of struggled with the whole study thing at first, and at the end, of course, he started crying, knew he was lost. And then last night was our first Saturday of the month where we go down there as well. And Ricky was there, and we walked in, and of course, he had this big old grin on his face. He can't wait. I mean, he can't wait. So on the way out, I was talking to Roger, and I said, you know, that's the happiest lost man I've ever talked to. So pray for him, especially, you know, where he's at, the environment he has to go through. And it's tough being a Christian in prison. So he would encourage, I think he's 52? I think he's 52 years old, so he's not a young kid. But we went through the whole thing with him, and he gets it. He's ready. So we're in Genesis chapter 19 and 20. We just finished the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and not just Sodom and Gomorrah. It was also the other cities that were there around there, and not only just the cities, but it was the land. Everything basically was burnt to a crisp. We look at Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 23. It lists the 4 destroyed cities, where it says, like the overthrow of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and in his wrath. Hosea 11, verse 8 says, God, you know, of course, God used the destruction of these 2 specific cities, along with Sodom and Gomorrah, as a metaphor for judgment. How can I make you like Admah? How can I set you like Zeboim? So, you know, when we hear the phrase, God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, yes, it's a metaphor for the whole of the region, but those were the 2 main cities, of course, that were destroyed. There's really 4, and it wasn't just the cities. You know, sometimes we hear things like that, and we hear the number 2, like her and I were just talking about hearing things that don't register sometimes, and sometimes they do, right? 2 cities. Well, it wasn't 2 cities. It was more than 2. And you say, well, when did it change? Well, it didn't change. We just look at it from that perspective. That's what we always hear, is those 2. But Genesis 19, 24 and 25 says, then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire, and he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. So these cities and all that was around, basically the whole valley, if you look on a map, you'll see a valley, kind of the southern end of where the sea is in the middle there. That whole section sometimes gets dried up, and sometimes it's full of water, sometimes it's not. But in this case, the whole place was just destroyed by fire and sulfur. How did it happen? Don't know. God made it happen. Was it a miracle? Okay, fine, it's a miracle. Or was it a timed event where it was what do you call it? Geological structure, you know. No, God caused it to happen. How are you going to look at it? God caused this place to be destroyed, period. And it says with fire and sulfur from the sky. Just because of my little pea brain, I like to read other things of, you know, what I call them the geniuses, the quote scholars, to see what they think. Some say, well, you know, there's this way where the sky gets overheated, and it could have been a hailstorm, and, you know, there are chemicals in the air, and it caused the hail to catch fire, and all that came down. That's what caused the burn. You know, just read the text. What happened? The text says was with fire from heaven. So that's what happened. So God destroys those, and in Jude chapter 1, there's only one chapter. Jude verse 7 refers to it as well. Refers to Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities suffering the punishment of eternal fire. What's interesting about Jude, if you want to turn over there quick, Jude, of course, that's in the New Testament, I think. Yes, yes, it is. Look at Jude verse 5. It says, I will therefore put you in remembrance, though you once knew this, how that the Lord, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed them that believe not. Of course, we know we just went, we're going to go through that later on. And verse 6 it says, and what does the word and mean? Well, it's a connection still to verse 5. It's where he destroyed those in the land of Egypt. It says, and the angels, which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. You know, what's interesting about that text of verse 8, it says, I'm sorry, at the end of verse 7, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So the angels in Sodom and Gomorrah, if you do any study of the language, the original language, how it's written, you know, of course there's present, past tense, you know, aorist tense, participles, and all that stuff that has meaning in the language. And this part of the sentence it's what we would say. It's a present act. It's in a present active case, which means what happened yesterday is happening today, and it's going to happen tomorrow. So what does that mean? Well, if you look at this, look what he says, where he says, "Are set forth an example, suffering the vengeance," is in a present active case, which means they suffered when they died. They suffered yesterday. They suffered for all these thousands of years, and they're going to suffer tomorrow. What a horrible thing. Right? Sometimes we don't think of it that way. We just say, oh, they got cast in a lake of fire, and they burnt up, and they just disappeared. No, they continue and will always continue to suffer. That should give us, you know, some thought and some indication of, you know, like Andy said during class, that there are lost people in the world that are just waiting to be taught the Bible, and it's our job to get it to them. So anyway, that's interesting how all the way back to Genesis 19, those folks that died there are still, as of today, suffering, along with the angels. Of course, on Judgment Day, they'll be cast in the Gehenna, the lake of fire, and they'll be there forever. Which is interesting, because if you talk to Jehovah's Witnesses and others that have that doctrine of annihilation, which sadly is coming into the church, not big, but it's kind of infiltrated the church a little bit, where they think, well, if you just die, you just cease to exist. And the righteous get to go to heaven, but if you're wicked, you just cease to exist. Well, that's what's known as annihilation. If you study with Jehovah's Witness for a length of time, they have a phrase that they're taught. I think it goes something like, when you die, if you're wicked, you're like Rover, you're dead all over. So they see humans as just like animals. You just die. What does that give people the hope for? Or non-hope? If I don't care about heaven, I don't want to go to heaven. So what does that mean if there's no hell, no eternal fire? Just go out and live your life and do whatever you want. When life's over, so what? Well, no. So anyway, so you know what's God doing here? God is giving us examples, of course, for the folks that were alive then, but also now that we can read what we call the book of Genesis, we can read how God's punishment, God's justice, of course, as well as God's mercy, how He let Lot exit, and his daughters and his wife, who didn't last long. But it shows both sides of God. It shows God's patience, His love, His mercy, His kindness, but also His justness, which is very interesting. And we don't sometimes read that in the text. You study with enough people, you come across someone to say, well, you know, the God of the Old Testament is different than the God of the New Testament. No, He's not. God is God, period. There's different laws, different covenants, different ways to look at Scripture. Of course, the old laws, the way I describe it, the old law, the old covenant is basically physics, and the new covenant is basically spiritual. If that makes sense if you understand my context. So that's what's going on. We looked at this last, I think it's where we left off, where chapter 19, verse 16, where Lot didn't really understand the urgency because, he talked to his kids or his daughters, and the two guys that were, I guess, engaged. There's some way to look at that in different ways, but they didn't take him serious. But then verse 16, and while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth and set him without the city. So they were drug out of the city, basically. Well, maybe not drug, but led out of the city. They were taking their time. And the two men, the two angels, said, look, you got to leave. And the point was, we can't destroy the city until you leave, because God promised that he would save the righteous. With argument, not argument, the discussion with Abraham. So Lot had to be saved. He was let out along with his two daughters, and of course where it says the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him out and set him without the city. Where are those two boys at?
In the city.
What happened to them? Shane said it was they thought it was a humorous story. It was joking. The English word I think used in some versions is they mocked him by saying this. What does that mean? If it was really a mock and they just ignored it, then we know they died with the rest of the folks. Which would make sense based on what's going to happen next with his two daughters and their dad. So they're apparently not there. And what happens with his wife? So you got verse 25. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities, that which grew upon the ground. Verse 26, but his wife did what? She looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. What was the one thing they were not to do? Don't look back. Why not? What was the harm? Okay, but that's not the future. But what was wrong with just, I want to see what's going to happen? They were told not to. That's for people with a simple brain like me. Don't look back. Okay, I understand that. It's very simple. Don't turn around. Don't look back. Just get a little bit of language there. She looked back. Of course, that's a Hebrew. These are all Hebrew words. You got the hyphal and you got the peel and other ways that the Hebrew writes their language. But it really means to look intently, to gaze, or to regard with attention. It implies more than just a casual glance. It's not like she just did one of these, looked over her shoulder. No, she stopped and wanted to see what was going on. And they were told not to do that. From behind him, the syntax makes the looking in a direct. Of course, it's a direct violation of the angelic command. Don't look behind you. Move forward. Look ahead. It's interesting, why, for me anyway, why God does what He does. We know it's always right. We know it's always good. It's always proper. But why is this in there, right? I wonder. We don't have the answer. He didn't tell us. I put this there because of this. We kind of know from other passages that God writes what He does for us so that we can know the truth. And the sum of God's word is truth. So it's all of it put together gives us the totality of truth. But basically, God says, don't look back. Don't think about it. That's not where you're headed. You're headed out. It's going to be destroyed. I'm going to level the place. There's nothing. There's nothing to see here because it's going to be gone. Where else did that happen? Earlier. The flood. Now that covered the whole earth. Now we know God made a covenant with Noah and says, I won't do that again. I won't destroy the earth with water. Okay. Well, he didn't destroy the whole earth here, but he does destroy this. This is a pretty large area. If you look on a map, this is not a small subdivision. This is a huge geographical area that was just completely leveled and destroyed with fire. But God kept his promise. That doesn't mean there's no floods anymore. That's not what I'm suggesting. But we understand what God's doing. He's casting judgment on those cities because of their wickedness, as we saw before, of what they were doing and how sinful they were. So she became, has a root word, it is to be or to become. And in the narrative context, it marks the immediate consequence of her action. It was instantaneous, right? She gazed, and the result was a pillar of fire. A pillar means literally a statue or a column, means to stand or to station. Interestingly, in other biblical contexts, that word, 1 Kings 4:19, 2 Chronicles 8:14, refers to a garrison or a prefect or a military officer, someone stationed permanently in one place. You know, we've seen them, we call them guards or sentries, that their job is to stand there. If you see the White House, there's usually two guys by the two doors, right? They just stand there all day. That's what they do. That's what this word means. So she was a permanent fixture where she stood because God said, don't look back, and she instantly became a pillar of salt and stood there. Now, where is it? I don't know. You may have seen pictures on the internet of, oh, there she is. That looks just like a woman with her hand, raised. You've seen some of those pictures, Don't know. So meaning salt, the ancient Near East, salt was a symbol of desolation and barrenness. So there's a lot of meaning behind why he chose or why God chooses what he does. There's meaning behind all of it. Why did he make her a pillar of salt? Why didn't he make her a dead tree? Well, because salt indicates just that. It was something that's desolate and barrenness. In God's eyes, she lost her value because of what she did. She violated God's will. If you look at the New Testament where Jesus says, when salt has lost its favor, what good is it? We throw it out to be trampled on. It doesn't mean just to be stepped on. It's that what they used to do is they used to use old salt and they put it on the roadways. And you'd walk on, not literally salt roads, but you'd have, that's where they would put it. Because it would be there. It would keep the weeds out and all those kind of things. If you go up the Northeast, they don't use salt. They use cinder, I believe, up there. But we understand what that means. So this is what happened to her. Because she made a conscious decision not to listen to the Lord. I'm going to turn around and I'm going to look. I want to see what's going on. And she becomes a pillar of salt. So that's kind of it's a difficult story to read about what she did. But what God's telling us is very, very simple. I know what I'm doing. Let me do my job. And if I tell you don't look back, don't look back. You don't need to look back. There's no need for it. Your future is ahead of you. So what's the summary of that? Well, his wife looked intently from behind him, and she became a stationed pillar of salt. So it was deliberate. She was gazing at it, and at the condemned city, resulted in her becoming a static, lifeless monument of the very destruction she sought to see. Now, some suggest that the pillar of salt that they claim they found is actually looking at the city. Well, you don't know that. But it'd be interesting, wouldn't it, to see that? If it was real, if you could actually see that. Not interesting in a joyous way, but just as a reminder, which we have reminders every day. I just read Romans chapter 1 about the Gentiles back then and the heathens that when they knew God, they consciously chose not to follow him or recognize him. Well, what did they not recognize? How did they know who God was? Because of the creation. We just look outside. How do you know God's exist? Because you're standing on his creation. Oh. So, all right, so 27 through 30. So right after that, it says, Abraham then got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. And he looked over towards Sodom and Gomorrah and toward the land of all the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. So, if you could picture, in your mind, if you're standing there from where he was, and Abraham comes out and he sees this. What do you think's going through his mind? What's the first thing you wonder he's thinking? I hope Lot made it out. Of course, the faith Abraham has or had, he probably believed and knew that God would keep his promise and he would escape. Sometimes if we read these things, and what I like to do is put myself there. If I'm coming out of my tent and I look down, there's the whole valley, the whole. If you've seen a map of Israel, it wasn't the whole size of what we know Israel today is. But it was probably maybe a quarter of it that was just totally disintegrated. So it was smoke of a furnace, and it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt. And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in a mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. So now we're switching back to Abraham, but then we're going to get back to Lot. But when we look at some of these things and what's going on with Abraham and Lot about the looking back, I don't know why is that up there? 27 through 30. Okay, so let's look at a few things about looking back or forgetting the past. Some folks like to dwell on the past way too much. I'm trying as I get older, not to do what a lot of folks do. Is all they do is talk about the past. Well, I remember 1964, and they had to talk for 3 hours about 1964 or 65. It's like, well, that's not wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong, right? But what does God want us to do? Live in the present. What am I doing now? As Andy mentioned, I like the way he put that. Am I just going to sit there? I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to go home and just sit there, watch TV, pull up YouTube, pull up DirecTV, whatever you got on TV, and sit there for hours and just sit there and do nothing, and wait for Wednesday to come around. Oh, well, it's Wednesday. I got to go to Bible class. Then we sit in Bible class. Wait until the next Sunday. Oh, Sunday's okay. It's Sunday morning. Oh, I got to get up. I got to get early. I got to go iron my clothes. I got to get my suit out, which I didn't wear my suit today because I get wet when I baptize folks. I always get soaked for some reason. I can't get around it. I've tried. But what does God want us to do? He wants us to be in the present and move. He wants us to move, be active. Isaiah 43, 18 and 19 says, forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing, now it springs up, and do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness and the streams in the wasteland. Of course, this is kind of an instruction linking the refusal to dwell on the past with the ability to perceive God's current and future actions. What does God have planned for us? For today? Do we know? Do you think about it? What does God have planned for me to do today? Well, He's told us in His Word. What am I supposed to be doing today? Of course, it's a simple answer, living out His will. That's the simple answer. But how we do that is the crux of the matter that we all wrestle with. Philippians 3, 13 to 14. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining forward what is ahead. I press on toward the goal to win the prize of God's heavenly calling in Christ Jesus. So Paul understood his mission is to always plow ahead, look forward. Because if we just walk out the front door and just look straight ahead, what are we going to see? What's down the hill? Right? Walmart. Yes, thank you. And all those people there, do you even think about that? When you walk and say, look at all those lost people. Well, Tom, how do you know they're lost? Okay, maybe they went to Lee May, maybe they went to West End, okay, fine. But generally speaking, they should be here. They should be. They should be somewhere worshiping God with God's people. But they're not. They're out doing worldly things. And yes, those of us that weren't raised Christians, yeah, we did the same thing. But what was Paul's point here? I've got too much stuff to do. I got too much activity, things to take care of. I don't have time for this. That doesn't mean we can't rest. I get all that. But too often, we want to dwell in the past. Sometimes we say, I forget who said it. It was here, and I kind of appreciated it. Maybe it wasn't here. But we always, and it's not wrong. Again, it's not wrong. But like on mission trips, we say, the Arnold Church of Christ is going on a mission trip. No, the Arnold Church of Christ isn't. Maybe 8 or 10 people are. They're going. Well, I can't go. That's a different story. If you can't go, you can't go. I get that. But sometimes we want to pay forward out of our pocket. We want to delegate, my responsibility as a Christian to others. Well, I just don't feel like going, but I'll write a check. Okay. The text says what? Go into all the world and preach the gospel. It does not say write a check and let somebody else go out into all the world and preach the gospel with your money. He wants me to do it. He wants you to do it. That's our job as Christians. We need to be active in our faith. And Paul understood this, right? He says he doesn't look forward. He doesn't look backward anymore. He presses on towards the goal. Every day. Every day we're getting one day closer to eternity, are we not? We all think we're going to live to be 100. Well, guess what? It doesn't happen. It might, right? When I was studying with Ricky last week, one of the things I asked him, is that kind of really gets their mind going is, I said, okay, so if you fall and crack your head on the way out and you die, are you going to go to heaven or hell? He goes, well, I think I'll go to heaven. Okay, what did he just say? He doesn't understand he's lost. Okay, so we went from there, went through the whole thing that we go through, and I draw pictures. I get the whole whiteboard filled, and I said, so are you inside of Christ or outside of Christ? He goes, well, I'm outside of Christ. Okay, so if you crack your skull and die, how do you think you're going to get into heaven if you're outside of Christ? I said, now, 3 hours ago, you told me that all those outside of Christ can't go to heaven. Did you say that? He says, yes. And that's when it hit him, right? That's when his own logic clicked, and he went, oh. Right? That's our job, to help people see that, right? Now we can tell them that. I found over the years it's better to get them to learn that on their own. Once they figure it out for themselves, it tends to work better. It's not wrong to teach that. I'm not saying that's not. So anyway, Luke 9 verse 62, Jesus replied, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the service in the kingdom of God. What does he mean by that? Sometimes we just read over that and think, oh, okay, that just means don't turn around. Why did he use that metaphor? Did you ever look into that? Did you ever look into why he used that? What was that like in the first century? How did they plow in the first century? What did their plows look like? What did they use? Right? Livestock, right? We think of a John Deere tractor. We sit there and do one of these things, like on Green Acres. Right, Matt? That's how we perceive it. But we got to look at it the way when Jesus said this, what did it mean to him? What did it mean to his listeners? Well, back then, the plows were very small and very light, okay? And if you were plowing, you had to keep looking at where you were going. You couldn't take your focus off of what you were doing. If you did, what's going to happen? You're going to start wandering. Okay? Yeah.
Most of the time, when they start to plow, they looked at something in front of them, and they focused on it, and they went straight to that, and it drew a straight plow line.
Right. Yeah.
And that kept their focus going ahead, like we're supposed to keep our focus
Right.
forward. And if you look behind you, you're going to have a crooked road, or, you'll go back, you're not going to have any road.
Right. Yeah, we don't want crooked roads. And yeah, the point Jesus is making is he doesn't accept crooked roads. Now, are we going to stumble? Yes. Right? Are we going to have issues in our life? Yes. But what's the point Jesus is making? What does he mean when he says this? As Danny says, our job is to focus this way, looking forward. My road is going to be as straight as physically possible with what I'm capable of doing myself. I'm not going to look over there and wander off of this. That's what James talks about, being wishy-washy. You're like the wave of the sea. You're up and down. Today I'm going to be a good Christian. Tomorrow I'm going to take the day off. He says, James says, don't even think God will give you anything with that kind of mindset. That's a pretty harsh statement, yeah.
I am happy that we live in the era that we do, because if I lived back then, I might have been one of them people that got zapped instantly. And there was a lot of cases of where justice was brought immediately on a person. And we don't have that today. And I'm thankful that I don't, because, I made some great boo-boos. And I might have been one of them people that made it.
Yeah. Danny said he's grateful. I'm going to paraphrase. He's grateful we don't live under the old law where God many times took immediate justice. Because when we do stupid things, he called them boo-boos. I call them stupid things. When we do stupid, sinful things, right? Are we grateful that God didn't take me out when it happened? Now, he did do that in the New Testament, right? The two people that lied about selling their property, they died instantly. Yeah, but I get your point. Yeah, that we are fortunate that take him out and stone him.
And I think about it often, because if I make a stupid mistake, I think, I am so proud that I can get a redo.
Yeah, a redo. Yeah. So looking back is not good. So we got some other things about looking at those kind of issues. Of course, Jesus used a lot of metaphors with that. He used one about counting the cost. What does it mean to count the cost? Is that a single decision? Was it a one-time thing? Right. He uses a couple of illustrations. One is about, of course, putting the hand to the plow. But he gives other examples of some coming up to him saying, "Well, Master, let me go bury my family member first." Jesus says, "No. Let the dead bury the dead." What does that mean? They're already dead. It's going to be taken care of. If you want to have life, if you follow me, if you want to stay in the past, that's where death is. Let the dead bury the dead. So we have those illustrations on purpose. Of course, counting the cost is Luke 14, verse 25 through 33. He's addressing large crowds when he does this. Gives the parable of the tower in verse 28 through 30. When he says, if you're going to build a tower, what do? You make sure, number one, can I afford it? Well, even before you ask the question, do I afford it, do I need it? No, I don't really need it. I just think it'd be kind of neat. So I'm going to go spend money that God gave me on something I think is neat. And by golly, people are going to like me because I have a tower, right? We can put anything we want in that kind of category. Now, I'm guilty of that. I got a lot of stupid stuff in my house. I'm trying to get rid of them. I've sold a lot of it because I don't need it. It's stupid. That's a different subject. But you get the context. Jesus is saying is don't, look forward, count the cost. So what he's asking me and what he's asking you is, are you willing to go through what you're going to have to go through to be my disciple? He puts that in the way of taking up your cross daily, not just when I feel like it. What does it mean to pick up your cross and carry it? Yeah. Yeah. Shane said, if we're going to become a Christian, we need to know what we're in for. That's another part of our job, right? Is when we're teaching folks. A lot of times we're just so quick about the 5 steps. Just hurry up quick. Just listen to what I got to say. I want to get you baptized so I can put on the notch on my belt. And then you're on your own. Good luck. No. Make disciples. Right? Did they count the cost? Did we teach them to count the cost? Do we help them understand what the cost is? Everybody's different. I get that. But what does Jesus expect of us? He tells us many, many times, over and over again, to do these. He mentions our family. If I love my mother and my father more than him, guess what? What comes next? Can't be his disciple. I can't be. Not that you might not be, or it'll be more difficult. You can't be. Why can't I be? Why can't I be? I'm focusing on them more than him. Plus, I now have 2 masters. Right? You can't serve 2 masters. Doesn't mean you hate your parents. I love my dad to death. But he knows that I love God more. And that always and should always come first, and we need to teach that to folks. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, balance is necessary. I get that, right? But the totality of Scripture teaches us what? That, okay, well, I have a family. I have to take care of my family. Yes, that's God's work. Okay, well, I got to feed my family. That means I got to work. Yes, that's biblical. Taking care of your family is biblical. Working is biblical. Assembling with the saints is biblical. Teaching others is biblical. How do I take care of my family? Do they need a dwelling place to live in? Yes, that's biblical. All those things are part of the Christian life and part of the Christian walk. Yes. Like Shane said before, is that too often, because we're Americans, right, we're all so filthy rich that we kind of just gloss over everything and say, well, because I don't have as much as my next door neighbor, I need to go get some more. No. What did Jesus tell his disciples to take with them? Nothing. Now, what would you do if you're in that situation? You see Jesus, you figure out who he is, you say, I want to follow you. He says, okay, here's the cost you have to count. Drop everything. Period. Would you do it? We all say, oh yeah, I'd do it, right? But when you're put in that situation, would you do it? Well, we know some of the folks did. Well, let me go bury my father. I just bought some new animals for the farm. Let me go test them, make sure they work right, then I'll come follow you. Jesus says no. Now, he's not saying those aren't important things. What he's saying is they are not more important than who he is, and the mission that our job as Christians is. So you got to be careful when you're teaching folks that. A lot of times you come across folks say, well, you got to sell everything and just, sell your house, sell your car, sell your clothes, sell everything, and just basically walk out with the clothes on your back and just start walking. Well, that's not biblical. Now, if you can do that, fine, right? There are people that do that. But it's not wrong to have a family. It's not wrong to have a house. It's not wrong to have a car. But what is my motivating factor that drives me? It's this, when you I was talking to somebody else the other day about rich people. How many rich people in the Bible did Jesus ever approve of? Did you ever contemplate that? How many? Yeah. You could throw out Joseph of Arimathea was a rich guy, okay, but what did he do? He woke up and said, I'm going to go bury this guy in my tomb. But outside of that, how many rich people did God say, what, he's great because he's rich? Can you think of any? On the other hand, how much does Jesus talk about the poor? A lot. That doesn't mean we have to go sell it. That's not what I'm getting at. But what is important to me? What is my focus on? Yes. Anything that gets in the way of spreading his word is a problem. If it gets in the way, if it hinders me, if it stops me, right? Well, but I've got 3 houses and 5 cars. I have to work extra hours to sustain this. No, you don't. Sell it. You don't need it. Right? That's the problem with wealth. Once you accumulate so much wealth, guess what? You have to sustain it. And sustaining wealth is what? Sustaining wealth. That's exactly what it is. You're sustaining your wealth. What good is it going to get you on Judgment Day? But Jesus, I had all this wealth. I was such a good person at work. I ran such a good company. I was well liked and everybody loved me. All these things that we can come up with, and I was a good person. Did you feed the poor? No, I didn't have time. Did you visit me in prison? No, I don't do those things. But I hired a lot of people. Okay. Did you pay them a good wage? No, not really. Well, you get my context. So this looking back thing is a huge thing that Lot's wife took a death toll on her because of one thing. She didn't trust God, is the bottom line. She didn't trust him. Don't look back. Okay, fine, I'm not going to look back. Any last comments or thoughts, points? If you want my slides, I can email them to you. Yeah.
The basis of what we're saying is, if God's not priority 1, then you've missed the whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So to keep your focus, you can have these other things as long as you haven't lost your focus.
Yes and no.
Well, I know people that have plenty, and I know people that have little, and I know several people that have plenty, and their focus is laser sharp, and they follow and do what they're supposed to do.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But now you can be a Solomon and lose your way.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, thanks for the comments. Appreciate it.